Thank you, everybody, for joining me for another Workplace Wonderer Memo. These little 15, 20-minute, at least that's what I'm aiming for, but usually I'm long-winded and I keep talking and I ruin that time limit, but I'm aiming for 15, 20-minute little clips here that dive a little bit deeper into topics related to the workplace and hopefully offer everybody some tips and some tools that they can use and implement right away, and hopefully some knowledge that you can bring back to your workplace to improve it. What I like to do is take a look at what some of the influencers in this space are talking about. And today's influencer is Simon Sinek. Today's topic is a topic that keeps getting brought up, and I think it's very misunderstood. It's very broad. I think it can go a lot of ways. So what I wanted to do today was to look at some of the information I found online in some articles, see what Simon Sinek says about it, and then also look at some of the research that exists on this topic. There is a inordinate amount of research on this topic. So I just picked out a few that I thought were interesting, that made some good points, that had some general knowledge and then some very specific knowledge about the topic. The topic is toxic workplace culture. We are going to look at it in a number of ways. We're going to define it generally. We're going to look at how toxic workplaces lead to a lot of turnover and what that turnover can do, and then what organizations can do to reduce turnover. We're also going to look at the impact of workplace bullying, which has some pretty serious implications if there is a workplace bully, and the suggestions that come along with the research related to workplace bullying. We're also going to look at supervisory abuse. So abuse from supervisors, bad bosses. We're going to look at some bosses that abuse their subordinates, abuse their employees, abuse their team members, abuse their managers, and see what happens there. Also, something that people don't consider is the concept of vicarious supervisory abuse. What is that? You'll find out later today. For me, I'm just hoping to share some information with you guys in a way that is not a total snooze fest. So I'm going to explain from my perspective on a lot of these topics, see how I can add to the research that exists, the articles that we go through, and I hope you enjoyed this. So let's jump right in. All right, as usual, I like to start off with defining what is a toxic workplace. So according to Wikipedia, every doctoral student's favorite source for information, a toxic workplace is a colloquial metaphor used to describe a place of work, usually an office environment, that is marked by significant personal conflicts between those who work there. A toxic work environment has a negative impact on an organization's productivity and viability. That is very true. The research and everything we're going to go through supports that. It also, I guess in terms of viability, we look at bottom line. It has a big effect. A toxic workplace culture has a big effect on the bottom line. This type of environment can be detrimental to both the effectiveness of the workplace and the well-being of its employees. That is huge. We want to make sure we're taking care of our employees. We have to look at our employees as they are assets, not just people to fill roles within an organization. Very important to consider. Toxic workplace gets thrown around a lot. I think what makes a place toxic is there are certain behaviors, of course, like bullying, like abuse, like micromanaging is another one. There's certain behaviors that go on within an organization, and of course, immoral behaviors, by the way, stuff that really goes against our moral code and moral fiber, that can make a workplace toxic. We also want to consider, though, that it's kind of become a buzzword, and people like to throw around the term toxic workplace quite a bit. And that usually when people are describing their toxic workplace, they're usually describing a workplace that's not a good fit for them in terms of values. It's not a good value-based fit. So they may be somebody who values bringing their authentic self to work. They may be somebody who values collaboration and values being connected and having empathy. And the workplace that they found themselves a job in doesn't. And they care more about competition. They care more about profit. They care more about performance. They don't care about your personal self. They want you to come to work, show up, do your best, and keep your personal crap at the door. That's okay, as long as you have an employee who values those things. If you have an employee who comes in who doesn't value those things, and also the reverse is true as well. If you have an employee who values all of those things that I just mentioned, and they're working for a place that really values collaboration and empathy and bringing your authentic self to work and being personal and professional. And, there's a lot of that goes into workplaces. That person could also consider this workplace toxic. I actually had a friend who worked for Simon Sinek's company, and within that company, they didn't want to be in a place where they felt like they had to share personal stories and connect with their coworkers. They wanted to come to work and do their job and leave. And for them, that workplace felt toxic. Now, Simon Sinek probably does a great job of creating a very non-toxic, generally speaking, work environment. But for that person, their values didn't align. They didn't want to be at a place that cared about all of those things. So for them, that workplace felt toxic. So it really depends on a cultural fit, a values fit, I think in general. But of course, as we're going to dive in here, we learn that there are some behaviors and some things that can happen that can make a workplace toxic. So we go into first, I want to just go over some Simon Sinek stuff. You could tell right away, he's somebody who, he describes himself as an optimist. And I love the way that he describes being an optimist, that it's not denying the realities and the harshness of this world. It's just a belief that with all of those realities of this world, the outcome is going to be good. And if we stay focused on a positive mindset, and if we believe that everything happens for a reason, the outcome is going to be a positive one. I've always liked that. Leadership is not a license to do less. Leadership is a responsibility to do more. Our vision is only actionable if we share it. Without sharing, it's just a figment of our imagination. It's easy to be honest. Just tell the truth. Talking about moral leadership here. He goes into a lot of different things, and leadership is not a rank or position to be attained. Leadership is a service to be given. So we can see here that a lot of this is really speaking to the millennial and Gen Z generations, and of course, any older generations that have some of the same values. It's where we want to feel like we belong at work, and we want our leadership to lead the way in helping to create a psychologically safe workplace culture. We spend most of our lives at work. So we should be at a workplace that is fulfilling us, not just financially, but also fulfilling us to our core, fulfilling our core values and giving us a sense of like we're giving back to this world and a sense of purpose. So the last one I'll read here is, when we know why we do what we do, everything falls into place. When we don't, we have to push things into place. Something I talk about all the time. Many leaders make the mistake, and this is where this is a toxic behavior here, is becoming almost like a dictator and just telling people what to do and not explaining why creates no buy-in for the employee. If they know why, they can then apply their own personal talents and abilities to it, and they could feel more motivated to get that task done because they understand that they're contributing to a bigger picture. There's a bigger goal that we're aiming to hit. And if you know why you're being assigned a certain task, you know what cog in that wheel you're playing. So I think explaining to people why gives people a sense of purpose and doesn't feel like they're just being directed to do tasks meaninglessly. Toxic workplace culture, the killer of progress. So this goes into some of Simon's book about Leaders Eat Last. Simon says, toxic workplace culture is a breeding ground for the stress hormone cortisol. Interesting. Cortisol stifles the release of oxytocin, the neurochemical which fosters empathy and trust. I actually like to flip that I believe being empathetic and being trusting and creating trust actually releases oxytocin. So I know that the oxytocin reinforces that trust in the relationship. But if we can showcase trust and act empathetically towards our team members, we can actually release that oxytocin and create that bond. When employees lack empathy and trust toward one another, they're much less likely to collaborate, seeing each other as a competitor and threats to their own success. The dangers of not prioritizing your subordinates' needs. Paying attention to and fulfilling your subordinates' needs creates supportive environments and encourages collaboration and innovation. On the other hand, if you don't prioritize your subordinates' needs, cynic implies that you become a threat to them. You lose your empathy for your subordinates and start seeing them as assets to maximize profits rather than people. As such, you stop being attentive to or fulfilling their needs, only supporting people who maximize profits. Huge mistake. Huge mistake. Nobody wants to feel like they're making somebody else richer. And nobody wants to be treated like they're just there to make somebody else more money. They want to feel like they're contributing to a cause. I don't care if you're making those fidget spinners that we used to have a while back. I don't care what it is. If they feel like they're contributing to something greater than themselves, then they're going to want to do their job more, and they're going to feel more content and happy at work, and they're more likely to be retained by that organization. The most toxic person in the workplace. I love this one. So I guess I should read this part that I didn't highlight. The problem with businesses is that we have a million ways to measure someone's performance, KPIs, but none measure their trustworthiness. The most toxic person in the workplace is somebody who's not trustworthy. They end up promoting or bonusing toxicity in the organization to a person who is a toxic leader and toxic team member, which is bad for the long game. It eventually destroys the whole organization. We need to remember that toxicity spreads like a virus. It's highly contagious. If you have one team member who may be your best salesman, for example, may be your best performer in some sense, whatever it may be, they may be the most creative person there, but they're toxic. They lack the people skills to work with other people, and they put other people down, or they're not a good cultural fit. You have to do something about it. And it doesn't always mean get rid of them. People are so quick to say, like, you got to fire them, get rid of that person. It usually means they need more training. They need some more coaching, mentoring, someone to call it out. Of course, if that stuff doesn't work, then you have to do something about it. Go to any team and ask who is the asshole, and they will always point to the same person. It's pretty obvious when someone on their team is an asshole. I like the way that Simon breaks it down here, is that we're looking for somebody who has high performance and high trust, the ideal employee. Medium performance and high trust is also good. Low performance and high trust is okay. High performance, low trust, toxic leader and toxic team member. Low performance, low trust. Obviously, why would you want that person on your team? It's the trust. That trust piece is so important. You want somebody you can trust on your team. Somebody that other people can trust and rely on. It doesn't mean they have to be like the savior of it, but you need somebody who has people skills on your team. They can be a high performer, even a low performer, but if they have high trust, they're still worth keeping on your team. You could always train somebody to perform better, but if they have good people skills, that's a tough one to train. Simon Sinek, how to deal with toxic team members. A high-performing employee with low trust is a toxic team member. According to Simon Sinek, this is building off the last one, you are better off with someone who inspires high trust, even if they are just a mediocre performer. The challenge is helping those who lack it build the trust they need to succeed. Sinek said, trust equates to personal character. For example, whether someone will have your back when the chips are down, and whether they exhibit humility, empathy, and patience. Those are the qualities we want in good leaders, Simon Sinek says, as well as good teachers. Don't fire them, he said. Coach them to learn the right skills and improve performance. To make money is egocentric and uninspiring. That cannot be your why. So again, this moves away from the idea of where businesses used to be focused on, how do we maximize profits? And for a long time, even 5, 6, 7 years ago, that was the main focus of businesses. And it still is a huge focus. I'm not saying that companies shouldn't focus on that. But we need to understand why. Employees now want a why. I think COVID, the pandemic, really has had people questioning their humanity. And they want to understand, why am I doing what am I doing? What am I contributing to the world around me? Why does any of this matter? If we have that why, we can be inspired. Apple always said, looked at it as define the mission as challenging the status quo, changing the status quo. They make computers, they make technology. But instead of saying we were just trying to make really good products so that we can sell a whole bunch, they said we're changing the status quo. They created a movement out of what they do. When I was in high school, I worked for Blockbuster, which, by the way, was the most boring job ever. Whenever I went into work, would have us watch these modules on how to win the war against this emerging company. That emerging company was Netflix. And at that time, Netflix wasn't a streaming service. They were just a service that mailed DVDs to your house. But every day, the focus of the employees, the focus of leadership was, how do we beat Netflix? How do we beat Netflix? How do we beat Netflix? We got to win the war against Netflix. Blockbuster got so focused on the wrong why, it became so uninspiring. None of us cared. We didn't care about winning against Netflix. We weren't there to fight a war against another company. We were hoping to make Blockbuster better, make the customer's experience better, but the focus was completely shifted away from customer experience and completely geared towards, how do we beat this other company? Now we know the end result of that. Obviously, Blockbuster has gone out of business, I think, except for one store, and Netflix is dominating the entertainment market. The biggest mistake you can make as an organization is making your why about making money or beating another company or being the best in your field. As an organization, your why can't be about making money or destroying your competition. That's not inspiring. Nobody wants to be a part of that mission, and that's toxic, in my opinion. Your why needs to be centered on, how can we improve the world around us? How can we give the people who work for our organization a sense of purpose, like what they're doing matters? Beating out Netflix didn't matter to me. It made no difference to my world. Our why should be about contributing to the greater good, especially after COVID. People want to know what they're doing matters. Okay, so you might notice there's been a bit of change of clothes. Maybe I shaved my beard. It took me a few days to put together some of the articles and read through all the different articles about toxic workplaces. So I took a little break. Also had to focus on school, but I'm here to finish the video finally. So what I ended up doing was looking through a number of different articles that I felt described toxic workplaces and a few of the behaviors that you might see in a toxic workplace. A lot of it has to do with abusive supervision, which I think is really interesting. And then there's one article that essentially lists a number of different behaviors that can be considered toxic. And these are all research articles. I read through them. They all seem to be well researched, and it seems to be like they really did take their time with their studies, and some of them are literature reviews as well of existing articles. So I hope you enjoy the rest of this video. I would like to know how you feel about it. Put it in the comments section. Make sure you subscribe and like this video. But I would love to see in the comment section anything that you might like about workplaces, anything you might want to hear about, anything you want to hear the research about, anything I can do to support you and help improve your workplace experience. That is what the Workplace Wonderer is here for. So let me know in the comments if there's something that you'd like to learn about, something that you want to hear some of the research about, and we'll make sure we dive into it. So let's go ahead and get started. So this article is an investigation of abusive supervision, vicarious abusive supervision, and their joint impact. So the idea here is that when we see a supervisor being abusive to our coworkers or to their subordinates, there's actually vicarious effect that ends up causing. It has almost like the butterfly effect within your organization, where when we witness a supervisor being abusive, it has a number of effects on the culture, and it almost is the same as us being abused as a coworker, even if it's not directly towards us. And what makes it interesting too is that there ends up being more abusive behavior that ends up kind of reverberating its way through the workplace. So it's almost like the supervisor sets the tone by being abusive to their subordinates. And then from that, other people see that it's a competitive environment, it's a toxic environment, and that it's actually okay to abuse people in the workplace. And you start to see more abusive behavior as time goes on. I highlighted a few of the different quotes from here. Although abusive supervision is likely to have a considerable negative impact at the workplace, there are unanswered questions for those who don't directly experience abuse, but hear about it or experience it secondhand. We term this is the vicarious abuse supervision I was talking about, since individuals often experience abusive supervision behaviors vicariously. There's evidence of the negative effects of vicariously experienced abusive behavior in psychological research. So they look at it as vicarious trauma. Vicarious trauma is an idea that a person doesn't necessarily experience the trauma firsthand, but they experience it second or third hand. So they hear about a traumatic event and it still affects them as if they experienced the trauma in some way. Obviously not as much as the person who experienced the firsthand trauma, but there is a reverberation effect. Oftentimes clinicians experience this when they're working with clients who have trauma, and they continually hear stories that are highly traumatic. It ends up affecting that person's nervous system as well. Our research suggests that vicarious abusive supervision is likely as abusive. Our research suggests that vicarious abusive supervision is as likely as abusive supervision to negatively affect desired outcome, with the worst outcomes resulting when both vicarious abusive supervision and abusive supervision are present. So the idea is just saying that, which this seems like a Captain Obvious statement here, but when there is abusive supervision going on, it's affecting more than just the relationship between the supervisor and the subordinate. It's affecting the culture itself and ends up having a pretty negative effect on the culture overall. This one is extending the trickle-down model of abusive supervision, the role of moral disengagement. So in this one, they define abusive supervision as subordinates' perception of the extent to which their supervisors engage in a sustained display of hostile verbal and nonverbal behaviors, excluding physical contact. Obviously, physical contact is bringing it to a whole nother level. The theoretical implications of the study that they did a literature review, this one. So based on the literature, they found that whereas ethical leaders tend to discourage subordinates' unethical behavior through preventing them from engaging in moral disengagement processes, abusive leaders unwittingly promote deviant behavior through encouraging their subordinates to engage in moral disengagement processes. So the idea here is exactly what we were just talking about before. Abusive behavior sets the tone for the culture. So people end up starting to feel like, oh, well, if my subordinate's abusing people, there's things that I can do too. And really, it's almost like that. There's the Stanford jail experiment where they all of a sudden, when people witness toxic behavior when they were playing prisoners, they end up contributing more to it and disengaging from their moral and ethical systems because they're seeing that, hey, a supervisor's telling us it's okay. And they sort of fall into this groupthink mentality where then they realize they start thinking that it's okay to display toxic behavior. That's the culture we've created. And it sort of has this snowball effect where everybody around starts disengaging from their moral system. Managers who abuse supervisors are likely to trigger moral disengagement within supervisors. After justifying their abusive behavior, supervisors are likely to abuse their subordinates in a similar manner. So it's the trickle down. This one discusses more of the trickle down model. So through all the hierarchy in the workplace, if the CEO or top leadership is abusive to the people, the supervisors under them, then they're more likely to abuse the people under them, and then they abuse the people under them, and that abusive behavior trickles down. So the last article talked about the reverberation or the butterfly effect of toxic behavior or abuse at work. This one talks about it trickling down throughout the organization, going from the top to the bottom. I did like this. This trickle-down cycle of abuse is also very costly. The cost to U.S. corporations of abusive supervision in terms of absenteeism, healthcare cost, and lost productivity has been estimated at $23.8 billion annually, $1 billion. Developments in the legal environment have made behavior of this sort of actionable offense for which organizations could have significant legal and financial liabilities. You understand what I'm saying? So the abusive behavior at work is no longer really being tolerated, as it shouldn't be. And it's actually now resulting in very high costs in terms of absenteeism, healthcare costs, people needing to probably go get help for their mental health, and lost productivity. You don't feel very motivated when you're in an abusive environment. You feel like you're just doing what you have to do to survive in that culture. And it's costing $23.8 billion every year. And then obviously there's legal and financial liabilities that are occurring. I'm sure people are suing for the effects that these types of organizations are having on them. Organizations also need to pay close attention to top management teams' abusive behavior because it has a cascading effect on lower level management and employees through the moral disengagement process. Again, it's just the idea that the more we see our leaders behaving a certain way, the more we are going to act out and go against our own morals. The more we're going to question our own moral system within and our values within and start behaving like the people who are setting the example. It's modeling behavior. So that's this one. The last resort, workplace bullying and the consequences of changing jobs. So this one's an interesting one. This is really about seeing, does workplace bullying have an effect on people wanting to change jobs? And it's essentially a last resort is what they're defining this as. That's what they're looking for in this study, is that does a person changing a job, as a person getting bullied, are they more likely to change jobs than non-bullied employees? Workplace bullying is defined as a systematic exposure to negative behaviors at work over an extended period of time in situations where the exposed have little or no possibility to defend themselves. Obviously, the idea and the reason why this study is being done is that they're talking about employee turnover. Does bullying have effect on employee turnover? And as we said, research on bullying and turnover or turnover intention supports the assumed association between bullying and leaving one's job. The results, so here's, they did their study, and here's a lot of the data. The results showed that those who were subjected to bullying behaviors or self-labeled as bullied were more likely to change jobs. Surprise, surprise. Again, it's that toxic behavior. People don't want to stay in a toxic behavior or toxic culture. And this seems pretty obvious, but oftentimes organizations tend to ignore bullying behavior because they look at it, they can justify it. Oh, they're just being competitive, or those people who are doing the bullying are top performers. So it's okay if we're losing people under them because those people are top performers, but they're not realizing that they're losing team members and they're spending a whole lot more on recruiting, hiring, training, and they're creating a culture that's very toxic. So people don't want to stay there. A company with a good culture and organizations where employees are happy to be working there and don't feel like they're being bullied and don't want to switch jobs actually tend to make more money in the long run, and their company themselves actually having a lot more longevity in the business sector. When victims of bullying are exposed to prolonged negative treatment, their fundamental belief in the world are threatened. which could result in extreme emotional reactions and depression. So you're not just affecting a person's job here, we're also affecting a person's mental health. If they're being bullied, this doesn't just happen in workplaces. We see this with teenagers all the time, and that's part of the reason why our mental health rates are so low right now, or high, however you want to look at it. Suicide rates are the highest they've ever been. Addiction rates are the highest they've ever been, especially amongst teens who are getting bullied. The more bullying that occurs, people end up feeling they feel threatened, and they feel like they don't know who they are, and they start to actually believe the bullies, and they believe that they don't have purpose in this life. They believe they're not worth anything, and pretty bad things happen from that. However, as discussed above, it should only be a last resort in terms of leaving. So they're talking about here for employees. Well, actually here, so let's go up here first. As for depression, there was no difference between stayers and changers. Changing jobs did not reduce the risk of depression if one had been bullied. An important notion here, and I want you to think about this, is that once a person is bullied, they need to seek outside counsel and outside help. Just the changing of the job alone, while it's obviously slowing the bleed, so to say, you're not necessarily fixing the risk of depression at that point. The person had already been bullied. The damage was already done, and they need to do the work outside of the workplace system to start undoing and reprogramming, I would call it, themselves, so that they can get out of that funk or out of that depression. And they talk about changing jobs. It's all in all, changing jobs seem to have positive consequences for the individual employees exposed to bullying. However, as discussed above, it should only be a last resort. It is important to remember that solving the situation by encouraging the victim to leave will not address any of the underlying causes and shortcomings in the work environment. So these are implications for the employer. If an employer is reading this, a manager is reading this, this is talking about just removing the person who's bullied doesn't fix the problem at hand. The bullying itself has to be addressed, and we have to take a look then at the culture. If we're allowing this type of behavior, allowing this type of bullying, we need to really take a good hard look at ourselves and our own culture and our organization and say, are there things that we should be doing differently? If people want to leave because they feel bullied, is that really the type of culture that we want to have? If not, what type of changes do we need to make to our culture? What do we need to address in order to reduce some of this behavior and start getting us back on the right track? And last, this is called Turnover, the Real Bottom Line. So this is a whole article about the reasons why people leave organizations. It's better for an organization to keep experienced and productive employees than to hire new ones. However, to get and keep loyal workers, the organization must have had a long run time horizon. It must invest in its employees through training programs and value them through strong organizational vision. In the face of eroding loyalty, attracting and keeping good people is the key to strategic staffing in all industries and sectors. So this is talking about, the whole article talks a lot about why loyalty is important, and there's a few other examples of it. For example, a Lewis and Harris Associates survey pegs the cost of losing a typical worker at $50,000. Another nationwide, that's one typical worker. Another nationwide survey suggests that the average internal cost per hire for an engineer is $4,900, computer programmer $2,500, secretary $1,000, retail sales associate $350, and assembly line workers $300. These may not seem like huge costs to corporations, but they add up. Every time an employee leaves and you have to hire a new one, these are the costs you're dealing with. The out-of-pocket or visible costs can be categorized as cost of termination, advertising, recruitment, candidate travel, selection, hiring, assignment, orientation, signing bonuses, and relocation costs. The cost of replacing a worker is often underestimated because in addition to visible costs like the ones noted above, there are many hidden costs and consequences of turnover. Think about the time it takes for a person to assimilate to an environment. It's not just as easy just saying, okay, I'm going to hire this person, they're going to come in, we'll train them a little bit and they'll be fine. There is a curve there that takes place where it takes time for a person to feel confident in a role. So what causes turnover? Specifically, current labor force demographics suggest that new the new diverse workforce will not respond to old traditional management practices. So we need to start thinking about the workforce that we're working with now. And this is in 2000. So can you imagine how much this has changed? This article's from the fall of 2000. There's a lot of changes that occurred, and they're already talking about how the current workforce does not respond to traditional management practices. If this was in 2000, I want to ask you, does your organization still operate under traditional management practices, or are they with the times? The key to curbing exits is for managers to gain insights into employees' attitudes by understanding their personality traits and core beliefs and fostering long-term and well-conceived employee development plans. The result of such turnover reduction intervention may help organizations to improve the retention of valuable people, especially the most enthusiastic and skilled and proficient ones. So there's a number of areas that they suggest looking at here. One is hiring practices, and I loved this, putting the right people in the right position at the right time and then training them. So important. So important. You don't want to hire people, put them in the wrong position, hire at the wrong time. You've got to really think about these things and then make sure you're training them well. They'll feel a lot more self-efficacy or confidence in their abilities, have a lot more hope, optimism. They'll feel a lot more autonomous in the position, and they're going to contribute quicker to the culture. Managerial style. A company's work environment is a reflection of the personality and philosophy of its leadership. I love this one. A company's work environment is a reflection of the personality and philosophy of its leadership. Leadership matters. Managers with myopic vision may often experience excessive turnover or churning, and they may end up with insufficient number of qualified people. Myopic vision means that they're tunnel vision almost, in a sense. They only see things one way. They're not flexible. They're not adaptive to their environment. They're not adaptive to their employees. They just have one style, one vision, and one idea for how the company should be ran. And that's just not reasonable. Another factor contributing to turnover is the fact that some managers tend to focus on and manage for yesterday's conditions. They're not situationally aware. They're not aware of the world going on around them within their organization and outside of the organization. You need to consider and be very self-aware and situationally aware of what is going on around you and make sure you're responding to current stimuli, not yesterday's stimuli. The workplace, the ways of doing business, and the nature of work are shifting, and organizations and managers must adapt to keep up. Lack of recognition. I love this too, and it's very important to consider feedback. Make sure you're giving people recognition when they're doing things. Lack of personal and team recognition translates to the employee as a lack of success. How do you know if you're doing well unless you're being recognized for the work you're doing? I can't tell you how many organizations and cultures I've worked with where all they do is recognize bad behavior and they call out bad behavior and they never provide any recognition for positive behavior. They never compliment. They don't tell you when you're doing a good job. They only tell you when you're doing a bad job. That is not a way to operate a company. In fact, most studies have actually shown that people respond a lot better to positive reinforcement than to negative reinforcement. Think about that. They want more than the standard pay and benefits package that formed the heart of the traditional retention plans. Back in the day, it was just, hey, I want good pay and good benefits, and I'll be happy and I'll work here for 40 years. People want more than that these days. You can call them millennials, call them Gen Z, call them whatever you want, but the reality is that people these days are purpose-driven, they're passion-driven, they're ethics-driven. They want to feel like they're contributing to something greater than themselves. So it matters to them that they receive those compliments and that they're aware and they feel like they're part of a team, and then they feel like they're being recognized for their hard work. They want to feel like they're contributing, but they don't know if they're contributing unless they are told that they are. And there's little wonder why the lack of recognition is the number one reason why people leave their jobs. No comment there. Lack of competitive compensation systems. Pretty obvious there. Toxic workplace environment. So making sure that we're avoiding toxic workplace environments are very obvious. According to Jeffrey, there's a bunch here, and I love this. So we go over through the signs of a toxic workplace. According to Jeffrey Pfeiffer, several studies reveal that companies that manage people right will outperform companies that don't by 30 to 40%. Companies that manage people right will outperform companies that don't by 30 to 40%. Think about that. Signs of a toxic workplace are when an organization requires people to choose between having a life and a career, when an organization treats people as if they are a factor of production, so when you're treating them like another number, when an organization looks at its people and sees them as costs, salaries, benefits, and overhead. That is, some organizations do not see their employees as assets. Huge mistake. People see their employees just another cog in the system, and they're not seeing them as their greatest assets, when in reality, the people who deliver your service, deliver your product, that make your machine run well, they are your greatest assets. That is where you want to invest your money. It's within the people. Your money, your time, your energy, it all should be going towards your people, because if your people are happy, your people are content, they're satisfied with their workplace, they feel productive, they're challenged, they feel safe. If they feel all of those things, then they are more likely to produce better outcomes for you. It's as simple as that. I don't understand why people stay so focused, and they're so focused on building the next product or bringing the brand to the next level or whatever it may be. It's your people that are going to do that. Give them the room to succeed, and they will. Give them the tools, the resources to succeed, and they will. Give them the damn attention that they need to succeed, and they will. Sorry for that last rant. Thank you, everybody, for watching another Workplace Wonderer Memo. I hope you enjoyed this. Please comment below what you'd like to be dissected in the next memo. And if you've learned anything, don't create a toxic environment. See you guys later.